to Houston Sports Talk with your host, Robert Land.
I will pay anybody $15,000 to find me a lady friend. Now, she has to be kind, she has to be fun, and she has to be wealthy because I'm going to owe somebody $15,000. Thank you very much.
Well, usually my guests on the show have a relation to Houston sports, but for this one, I'm talking to somebody who actually does love sports, but who has a hell of a story well beyond the sports world. Andy Huggins is with me. In the last few years, I saw Andy perform comedy in Houston with our mutual friend Matthew Broussard, who ended up going to Hollywood and has since hosted an MTV2 show, at a Comedy Central stand-up special, and performed on Conan O'Brien. Now, when I ran into you a few months ago, Andy, I asked you, how's it been going? You said, well, I've had an interesting week. I was on America's Got Talent, and it went rather well. How well did it go? The judges in the crowd adored you. And at last count, I saw, what was it, the YouTube clip of you had 750,000 views or something like that?
Yeah, something like that, yes, and did go very well.
What's your name and where you from?
Andy Huggins. I'm from Houston, Texas.
So is this the big dream?
To do stand-up on national television? Absolutely big dream.
Good for you. Well, good luck.
What was that like? What was it like to go on America's Got Talent? What was the whole process? How did that happen for you?
Well, what happened was, a couple of years ago, I was in a comedy contest at the Improv in Addison, and they filmed it. It was on the internet, and one of their producers found it and liked it a lot and gave me a call. Say, would you consider participating? And I said, of course, yes. And then the process involved their story editor calling you and getting your background, what you do now, what you've done. There were 2 phone calls from that gentleman. And to jump way ahead, I think that's why I advanced to the second round. I didn't advance to the third round. I wasn't told why, but it was the producer's decision. And I'm almost sure it's because my backstory is just boring.
Let's get to your backstory, because it's incredible to me. So, when I asked you, I said, well, how long have you been doing this, 8 or 10 years? And you said, no, I've been doing this since the 70s. Tell the story. You grew up in Virginia, right?
Yeah, I grew up in Virginia. This is 76, 77. And I'd always been fascinated by comedy, stand-up in particular. But in the mid-'70s, there was no place in Virginia. I mean, the comedy boom hadn't started yet. There was the Improv in New York and the Comedy Store on the West Coast. But I decided that stand-up is what I wanted to do. I did a couple of shows in Virginia going on in between a folk singer during his break, just a couple of times. And then with all that experience and not that much money, knowing absolutely nobody in Los Angeles, not having a plan other than I was going to go up on open mic night at the Comedy Store. And that was, when I think back on it, Robert, I get the shivers because it was the stupidest plan ever, because there was no plan. I just went. I didn't know anybody. I didn't know, I thought I had enough money to survive for a while. And, of course, that wasn't true. That was nowhere near true. But I got real lucky. My first night at the Comedy Store, I did real well, and they asked me to come back the next week. And I thought, well, they're asking me to come back next week because I did real well. What I didn't know was the next week I was showcasing for Mitzi Shore. And I didn't even know I was showcasing for her when I went on stage. I just thought I was doing another set.
And for the people that don't know, the Comedy Store, I mean, that's where everybody went that wanted to make it big, because Johnny Carson would mention on his show every night.
That's how I knew about it, yeah.
Yeah, he would say, look, I just found this guy at the Comedy Store, and everybody that got on Carson seemed to be a big deal right afterwards if they hit. Yeah. It was that made their career. And you weren't even considered a comedian, right, unless you were on Johnny Carson almost.
Right. And so I unknowingly auditioned for Mitzi and got past. So if I didn't get past and I had to keep going to the open mics every Monday and standing in line, and I don't know how it would have turned out. So that was the first just unbelievable bit of luck. Worked out that way. So I was out there for a couple of years. Some people from Houston moved out to Los Angeles, Bill Hicks among them. my great friend Jimmy Pineapple and Riley Barber. One by one, they moved back to Houston. This was in the early 80s. And one day, they're all back in Houston. They called me up. I was still in Los Angeles. And they said, you need to come to Houston. There's more stage time. Because in Los Angeles, I'd occasionally get spots. Then I'd go a week without getting booked by Mitzi. Then a couple of spots in a week. It was very frustrating. And they said, no, you come to Houston. They were all members in good standing at the Comedy Workshop. You go on to the Comedy Workshop immediately, a couple of nights a week, and we got this, we got that. That's all I needed to hear was more stage time.
But at the Comedy Store out in Los Angeles, when you got there, I mean, first of all, one of the funniest moments, one of my favorite moments was when Howie Mandel said, hey, weren't you the same Andy Huggins that I knew at the, because Howie Mandel was there at the Comedy Store back in the late 70s.
About the same time, yeah.
40 years ago, I remember Andy Huggins as a 28-year-old kid, like me, on the stage. No. We were both starting out together.
Yep.
Do you remember me and you kind of starting out together?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so he remembered you, but, I mean, you're out at the Comedy Store at the time, and the name's out there, and my favorite book, one of my favorite books is I'm Dying Up Here.
It's a great book.
Details that whole scene back in the 70s, and the names David Letterman, Jay Leno, Andy Kaufman, Richard Lewis, Robin Williams, Elaine Boozler, Freddie Prinze, Jimmy Walker, Richard Pryor. All these, did you see all these guys?
Everybody but Freddie Prinze. And it was just so amazing because, like I said, I was in Virginia. I'd never been at a comedy club, never hung out with comics. And now all of a sudden, because I was made a regular, I had the option of coming by the Comedy Store and just hanging out, even if I wasn't performing. So I would do that, and all of a sudden I'm hobnobbing and rubbing elbows and exchanging thoughts with Letterman and Leno and Elaine Boozler. I met Richard Pryor there.
What were? Let me just go through some of those names. David Letterman. What do you remember about him back at that time?
We got along real well because we talked baseball. Everybody back then knew David was going to be big one day. I mean, he was a superstar at the Comedy Store and elsewhere, but he hadn't hit it big yet, hadn't had his daytime show even yet. And everybody wanted to talk show business with him, and everybody wanted to schmooze him about this, that, and the other. And he grew up in Indiana. We lived in Indiana for a while. And one day we got to talking baseball, and we just talked Cincinnati Red baseball. Of course, we were, back then when he was growing up in Indiana, it was Frank Robinson and Vada Pinson and that crew. So, yeah, we got along great. When he did his daytime show, obviously I didn't get a position on it, but he called me in to interview for it. We got along real well. Real nice guy. In fact, all those guys that I just named, and Elaine Boozler also, they were always, Steve Landisberg was great this way.
Barney Miller, he's known for the...
Oh, he was so good. He was such a good stand-up. They were always concerned about how you were doing. You get enough stage time, you're working on your new jokes. They never, there are a lot of guys, you ask them what's up, and they'll give you, where they've been playing for the last 3 weeks and everything that's going on. They'll give you their resume. But not, the people I just mentioned, they were always more interested in what the young comics were doing. So that is great. And all of a sudden, these people I've been watching on TV for, 5, 6, 10 years on, The Tonight Show and Merv Griffin and Mike Douglas. Now all of a sudden, I'm hanging out with them. It's wonderful. And
Leno, from what I understand, from everything that I've heard, he was a guy that the other comedians looked up for because he'd almost really become a professional before everybody else. I mean, he was so good at being able to frame the jokes and tell the stuff at that time.
Jay was terrific in the clubs, and I would go into the room every time Jay performed, even if he did pretty much what I saw him do 2 nights ago, whatever. He was just a wonderful performer, both in material and the delivery and the persona, dealing with the audience. Oh, yeah, he was great.
What do you remember about the hurricane of Robin Williams coming in and doing this? Do you remember that much?
Yeah, he would come in. He didn't have to call in for spots. He'd show up and they'd put him on. One time, it did not go well, but one time, what was the order? I think I went on between him and Steve Martin one time at the original. Nobody wanted to follow either one of them. And I'm standing right, well, I'll go on. And I don't remember what I said, but the first line was obvious. I just made some reference to what was going on, that I was following Steve Martin. That got a huge laugh. Then after that, I just died. just died. Then somebody told me you should have been taping that whole sequence where, Steve Martin says goodnight and they bring me up and then they introduce Robin Williams, but that's not on tape.
And Robin was like, at that point in his career, I think he had just hit, he had gone on to Happy Days, and that whole episode that he was on blew up into Mork and Mindy. Where was he at? Was he at Mork and Mindy by that time?
The first time I met him, there was a new laugh-in that they tried. He was a part of that cast. And I think it was right after that, leading into Mork and Mindy, leading into Happy Days, leading into Mork and Mindy.
And Letterman was, I think, on the Mary Tyler Moore's Variety show at that point?
Him and Michael Keaton both, I think, wrote and performed on her Variety show.
And was Keaton, was he there as well?
Michael Keaton was there as well. Michael Keaton had a great stand-up. He had a very good, you can find some of it on the internet. Michael Keaton, he was real good. But, I don't know how much he went on the road. I know he did some road work. But I think mostly the stand-up was to showcase his acting talent, because acting, I think, is what he was more interested in his stand-up. But he was an excellent stand-up. Everybody loved Michael's act.
I guess the seas parted when Richard Pryor showed up for the comedians.
Oh, yeah. As far as I'm concerned, Richard Pryor's the best I ever saw. And I've seen so many. I mean, we just named half a dozen, 8 different great comics. And I've seen them, and they're wonderful. But Pryor's the best, and there's nobody that's a close second in my mind. He was that good. And, the seas parted. He would come by the Comedy Store when he was preparing an album or a film, Live on the Sunset Strip or whatever the second one was. He would come by the Comedy Store every night and work on material every night. And as soon as word got out, it was just pandemonium at the Czar.
Who was the guy that gave you the best advice of that whole group? Who did you talk to, and they said something that stuck with you? Any of them? Not really.
I don't think. They all emphasized the work ethic. You gotta write. You gotta get on stage. You just gotta do it. And nobody told me, well, you need to change your persona on stage, or you need to be more animated, or can you do impressions? Nobody gave me specific advice. It was just by example, and like I said, the fact that they were always asking if you're getting enough stage time, and are you writing. So that was the advice. By implication, you need to write.
After that, you come back to Houston. You're here because Bill Hicks and Sam Kinison and Ron Schock, and it's the Texas Outlaw Comics you guys were known as, right?
What happened was, and I think this was the late 70s, Steve Epstein, who was a comic, put together a show, and I forget what theater it took place here in Houston, but it was Bill, Sam, Riley Barber, and Carl LeBeau. And they put on this show, and it was called Comics on the Lam or something. Somehow it had outlaw connotations to it. They went out to Los Angeles. Steve decided that he wanted to revive that idea, so he came up with the Texas Outlaw Comics. Sam wasn't a part of that particular group. It was Bill and Jimmy and Ron Schock and Steve and myself and John Pernetti. Now, later out in Los Angeles, Sam put together his own Texas Outlaw Comics, and they had their own show. So it's like the old days when there were 2 different groups calling themselves the Platters. We had 2 different groups doing Texas Outlaw Comics, and as far as I know, nobody resented, or there was no problem with that. That just the way it worked out. But the group I was part of did not include Sam.
Bill Hicks, you said, was a close friend of yours. He's sort of become a little bit of a legend. I mean, it's one of those where if you're a comedian and you die young, everybody. But he was brilliant. I mean, he was a brilliant comic. He was really a political comic in a way where he would incorporate some of that stuff, but just very thoughtful, kind of the way Carlin would. He was kind of try to undermine what you think you knew about whatever.
Yeah.
What was Bill Hicks like?
Real sweet guy, a great friend. I mean, if you were a friend of his, he'd take care of you whenever you needed help. He never, when the comics were hanging out together. He wasn't shy, but he didn't try to dominate. I think a lot of people might assume that Bill was the center of any conversation, the center of any party, the center of hanging out. No, he hung back and, was like, again, he wasn't shy, but he didn't try to dominate things. Very kind of a low-key personality.
What was it like watching him on stage?
Oh, it was always a lot of fun because he's very adventurous, absolutely fearless. He was capable of going off in a direction that wasn't planned. But, so, comics would come in to watch Bill when he was on stage. It's fun. He was such a good performer, very physical, despite maybe his conversational style. The jokes were very well thought out and well structured. He's just a very, very, very good stand-up comic in every way.
Sam Kinison, what was that like? What was it like to be around him? You hear the stories.
It was Sam, and I don't know that I ever experienced or even heard about too many incidences to prove this point. But Sam was just that type of personality where you're just always on your toes because you don't know what could happen. When he's on stage, he just brought with him an air of volatility, and just entered the room with him. And, if a fight broke out, you really couldn't be surprised just because, Sam had that kind of energy. Sam was a lot of fun on stage for a while to watch. Then he got kind of lazy about it. But when he first started gaining national attention, he was fun to watch.
You got to have a good story about Sam. Just some crazy thing happened. And what do you remember about anything that happened with him?
Sam moved out to Los Angeles about the time I moved to Houston. We probably might have passed each other in the air. So I didn't spend a lot of time around Sam. The great story, I don't know if you've heard this, but this is the most popular story about Sam. The old workshop was at Shepherd and San Felipe, and right across there was a convenience store. He got kicked out of suspended, I guess, from the comedy workshop one day. I don't remember why. Who knows? It might have been broken. Something might have gotten broken or something. So Sam, and I think he got a news crew out there or something. He crucified himself across the street. He did a Christ-like pose on the building, and he may have been dressed scantily or something. But that was because, and like I said, he got a news crew or three, newspaper person or three down there to record it and document it. But we didn't spend a lot of time. Sam wasn't somebody I was real comfortable around. A lot. He was very popular as well. He was great company, but like I implied before, he just had carried with him a kind of potentially
trouble was lurking always with Sam.
Yeah, there was always this is not breaking news, but there's just always a lot of drugs with Sam and unsavory. Yeah, it just wasn't. He wasn't fun off stage for me, and I guarantee you, I was a minority opinion as far as that goes. But he was a powerhouse on stage. There's no doubt about that.
I mean, obviously in L.A., you're around some special guys, but just the guys here in Houston at that time. I mean, do you realize as it's happening that, man, this is a special group to be a part of and to go on stage behind and in front of and that kind of thing?
We knew we were special because as it was going on, if we went on the road and comics in other cities found out we were from Houston, they couldn't do enough for us. We had a great deal of respect and admiration from comics around the country. So we got an idea that maybe, and you can just on any given night, and most of them are people you wouldn't recognize or your listeners wouldn't recognize. But gosh, there were so many good headline quality acts, wide variety of acts, from guitar acts to prop comics to monologists and to satirists and impressionists. It's just, we knew this was, you could just stand in the room and listen to the audience and realize this is something unusual. Because it was just boom, 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 comic after comic killing.
How long did that golden era, do you think, lasted here in Houston as far as the comedians are concerned?
Well, I think the workshop probably opened around 76, 77. And I think people started to disperse, and then the comedy scene started to lose a little momentum itself, probably around the mid-'80s. I think the club itself closed in the late 80s. They probably had a good 8, 9 years. But then other clubs started to pop up that were competing, and there was probably a couple other problems also. But, I would 8, 9 years.
What kept you here you could have gone back to Los Angeles and pursued things. What kept you here in Houston, and what made you stay?
Actually, I did go back to Los Angeles in 91. I swear to God, Robert, I don't remember why. I remember going back out there not doing anything or pursuing anything. I don't know what the hell I was doing. To this day, I couldn't, and it's not that long ago.
Do you feel like you could have you were hanging with these other guys as far as how you were on stage and your comedy at that time?
Well, it was so much, I stayed in Houston. I'm in Houston now just because of the comedy energy that's here and the stage time that's available, particularly back in the early 80s. And, gosh, nobody laughed more than I did back then. I swear to God, my friends were so funny. All those guys were so funny, and I was drinking and not really planning a career. I'd never thought past next Thursday. So that was another reason to hang around. I wasn't making plans to advance in my career. But mostly it was stage time and the guys.
Was it hard to stay away from, because there was, in comedy, there's, especially at the time in the 70s and 80s when you were in L.A. and in Houston, there was all the drugs and stuff like that. Sam was like on a whole other level, but there was a lot of that. You're kind of around alcohol all the time. How difficult was that to stay away from, and what, how did you deal with that?
I participated for a while. I got sober. I probably quit doing drugs maybe around 85 or 86. I quit drinking in 88. So I got 30 years sobriety. And, I participated, so it wasn't hard to stay away from it. Or it would have been, I guess, but I didn't want to. So it was, cocaine was, there was a time where cocaine was just every place here in Houston. And it was always at the club. I don't know. I did it for maybe a year or so and then quit because it scared the hell out of me. But I never had to buy any. Nobody ever had to buy any because there were drug dealers that loved hanging out with us. So I guess if you were inclined in that direction, it was difficult to stay away from it because it was always around. Were
you guys like rock stars? Were there women kind of coming at you as well
kinda,
at that time?
Yeah, kind of. Some more than others. I don't know that I was at the top of that particular list, but yeah, people thought of, they would invite us to parties at mansions and everything because they just wanted us around. There were several restaurants and bars where we were carte blanche, and there were women were attracted to the whole scene. A lot of women were, so kind of rock stars. That might be an overly romantic way of looking back on it with 30 years memory.
Before America's Got Talent, what was the closest that you had where something happened or it looked like you might get something that blows up into something more than that?
Back in the very early 80s, before I moved to Houston, I did a couple of TV shows, but they were the type of TV shows that weren't going to lead to anything, and I didn't expect it.
You were on situational comedies?
No, Don Kirshner's rock concert, which had a comic every week. I went down and taped that with about 6 other comics in front of maybe a dozen people. That same day, they had taped Devo, and they had a big crowd. When Devo finished taping, almost everybody left. They had about 12 people there. And so we all went on. Like I said, there were about 6 of us. The producer came to us beforehand and said, "You're not going to get any laughs. You're just not going to. But don't worry about it. We'll sweeten it up. Just do the joke. Pause where you normally pause. We'll throw in the laughs." Now, they did a great job, and they inserted each of us in 6 different shows. I think I was on with one of the Pointer Sisters, and I forget who else. But at any rate, this was funny because me and a friend, Irv Burton, were watching a comic go on in front of these 12 people, and he wasn't getting any laughs. None of us did. But he would do a joke and then pause forever. And Irv and I go, what the hell is he doing? Nobody gets a laugh that long. What's he doing? Then Irv finally figured out what he was doing. He was forcing them, he thought, to put in an applause break because he paused so long. So he was saying, well, they're going to have to fill the time with applause. Well, the joke was on him. He outsmarted himself because his never aired. That was, Don Kirshner aired late Friday night, maybe, I think, or late Saturday night. Yeah, that wasn't going to lead to anywhere.
A lot of times the comics would bring their friends with them to the Tonight Show or to tapings of other stuff. Did you go to that sort of thing with some of your friends who were comics?
No. The Mike Douglas thing, I got a call the night before. What was happening, it was the last year or so of the Mike Douglas show, so what they were doing was having one guest per show, a theme week or something, and it wasn't the normal panel and, 3 singers and then a comic and then an author. But they had scheduled the Commodores, and they all came down with food poisoning. So they had to put together a show literally at the last hour. So I got a call one night saying, can you do the Mike Douglas taping tomorrow? Said sure. Again, about 6 of us went down there. We each performed on that show. We were introduced as up-and-coming stars or the next great whatever bullshit title they came up with. So I didn't have time to invite people. I don't think I invited anybody to Don Kirshner's. I've never been one to invite people to shows as a rule. It's just a distraction to know that you have a friend or family or whoever out in the audience. So
you were on television with America's Got Talent. How long had it been since you'd been on television performing comedy?
Over 30 years. Say that was 1980, 81, 35, 36, 37 years.
What was that feeling like being on TV and everything that happened at it with America's Got Talent? I mean, what did you think was going on?
I'm a little wiser now than I was, say, 30 years ago. I would have been 30 years ago. And I realized, this will be nice. Have a great show. Get a good tape of it that it, after it airs, maybe something will happen, maybe it won't. I never looked at it at any point. I didn't feel like I was in a competition. It was just too big. I've been in comedy competitions before. This didn't feel like a competition. This just felt like a gig in front of the biggest audience I'd ever played to. So, I went out there thinking maybe so, maybe not. I got it, as I mentioned, because somebody saw a tape of mine on the internet. Okay, this is a tape that's been seen by will be seen by more people under top-notch conditions. We'll see.
Were you nervous?
That's the damnedest thing, Robert. I am nervous before every show I do, no matter how. And when I say nervous, you get that anticipatory set of nerves where you want to go on and do it. And
if you're not nervous, do you feel like, that's the problem?
That has always gone bad in the past when I go. But this time, an exception, and a spectacular exception to the rule, I went out there so calm, which was good for a couple of reasons. One of them being I was able to take in everything that was happening. Sometimes when you're a little uptight or nervous, maybe your senses are kind of blocked to some degree and you don't remember everything that happened. No, I went out there for some reason, and I cannot explain why, but there's a shot of me on the tape where they got a real tight shot of me approaching the microphone and taking the mic out of the stand. And I watched that, and I have such a smile on my face. I think, damn, Huggins, why were you that relaxed? It looked like I was absolutely ecstatic to be there. Let's go have some fun, is what it looked like. And again, I can't tell you why, because it's the biggest audience I've ever played to, 3,000 people or more. Huge stage. I got 4 judges sitting in front of me. If you do well on the show, the implications might be important. If you die, you don't want to. That could be very embarrassing. And plus, the show started late. That always drives me crazy when something starts late. It started late. There was no room to go be by myself. You're just surrounded by all kinds of, the other 72 acts waiting to go on. So those are all circumstances that normally would have made me crazy, absolutely crazy, particularly starting late. Didn't. Don't know why.
Did you get to meet Simon? Did he talk to you?
No, I talked to Howie afterwards, after our show was taped in about 10 comics. And I'm doing interviews afterwards with the show. Then I'm going back to the hotel, and Howie's out there having dinner with a couple of people. And went over. We talked for a bit, but I didn't meet the other 3.
What do you remember about Howie at that time, back in the late 70s. I mean, what was he like as a comic? I remember he's talked about, that was the time, I guess, where he would go on and blow the condom up over his head and do all that sort of, and being nervous was kind of his shtick.
Yeah, you'd almost call it kind of a spastic body language while he was on stage. And he did something odd with his hand as he was talking, a kind of an odd hand gesture that didn't look nervous. The kind of a gesture you would expect to see somebody who wasn't all quite there, and that was and he was a very strong act. We worked mostly on the same shows at Westwood, the Westwood Comedy Store, which is near UCLA, of course. And yeah, he always. I guess he had been doing it. I don't know how long he had been doing it in Toronto, but when he showed up in California, it was a fully formed, well thought out act.
Good guy too.
Yeah, real friendly.
And overall, you're saying most of these guys that you, or all of them pretty much, that you remember back from that time, everybody was pretty much a good guy that you...
Yeah, on that basis, I mean, I'm sure if I knew some of them better, I might see some things that would... But, you're at the Comedy Store on Sunset, at the Comedy Store on Westwood, you're hanging out, you're all there to do comedy, your peers... even though you've been in it 17 minutes and they've been in it 10 years, they still treated you like a peer because you're going on stage and telling jokes. Under those circumstances, yeah, everybody was a good guy.
Do you feel like when you kind of look back on everything, is it something that you can't believe happened to you, that you were at these places at these times and you got to be around these people? Or is there a part of you that thinks, oh, I wish I had... when you see the success that I wish I had some of that success. I mean, how do you feel when you look back in that whole era?
Well, for when I was at the Comedy Store, it makes me smile. It was remarkable, because I also remember what it was before I went out there. I wasn't around comedy. And I'm very blessed. I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. Exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm so blessed that way. And so being out there, it just kind of felt natural, too. I belong. I read a great book called The Last Laugh, and it's about stand-up comedy. Phil Berger, who's also wrote a great book about the New York Knicks, but it's about stand-up comedy post-World War II up to maybe the mid-'70s. And I read it before I ever went out to Los Angeles, before I ever officially in my own mind committed to doing stand-up. But I read that book, and it didn't always paint a charming lifestyle, but I read that and I thought, well, those are the people I need to be hanging out with. You just know. Sometimes you just know that's where you belong. So I look back on those days. Yeah, it was great. That's where I should have been.
Who were the guys that you looked up to when you were thinking about doing this? Who did you see on TV, or the comedians that really inspired you?
Geez, I just loved all on the Ed Sullivan Show, you'd see these East Coast comics that's kind of aggressive, which is totally what I'm not. But I got a big kick out of those guys. Woody Allen was a big influence. I love Bob Newhart, but I don't work anything like him. Woody Allen was the biggest influence. A lot of comics the younger comics they're not even aware he did stand up.
Yeah,
but he was very good.
He was great. I remember he did that stand up on the Academy Awards. God, it might have been a while back now. It's probably close to around 2001, but yeah, he knocked it out of the park.
Oh yeah, and that's the first time he had actually done a stand-up routine in quite a while. But there was all these, this is kind of interesting because I remember some people, I forget what led to this particular thinking on my part, but to me it was always about the jokes. I can't remember being in that, I would admire them, but the person themselves inspiring me. It was what they were doing, if that makes sense.
Right.
That inspired me. The fact that they were doing comedy was more inspirational. So, it was always about the jokes. It's always been about the jokes.
We haven't talked any sports yet, but I know you love the Astros. I know you love baseball. What did you think about the Astros season and everything that happened?
It's been the early 90s since anybody repeated. I think so difficult. So they won the World Series. Then they came back and won more games than the team had ever won before. They were every bit as good. Swept Cleveland. Then they ran into Boston, who was just they were the best team in baseball this year. So be interesting to see who stays and who goes. I have all the faith in the world in Lou now to replenish the roster as it needs replenishing.
I got a tough question for you. If you're going to put one Houston Astro on stage to go up there and tell some jokes, who's the guy that you're going to go with? I mean, Bregman's got a personality. He would have no fear.
Yeah, see, that was the first one that came to my mind for exactly that reason. I don't know how funny he would be, but he wouldn't be intimidated by the he might even have too much confidence in his ability to get jokes. I don't know.
I heard Brian McCann's a funny guy behind the scenes.
I've heard that too. I've never seen it demonstrated, but I'm guessing Reddick wouldn't be shy either.
Yeah, he wouldn't have any fear either.
Yeah, I don't know that he'd be funny. Bregman would be, if you could write material for Bregman, then he might be a good choice. I'm trying to think. McCullers is. I bet with the right material, McCullers would do very well.
Yeah, he's very well spoken to.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
He's not he wouldn't be afraid.
Yeah, I've listened to him interview, and he knows what fun he is, and he enjoys having fun with the topic. This, that, yeah. Now, I don't know how sharp the punchlines would be, but he might be good.
How hard was it for you to become an Astro? Because you said you grew up a Reds fan. Was it difficult to take the Astros in? At what point did you realize you got here? I guess in the early '80s. What point did you realize? Yeah, I'm kind of an Astros fan now.
I would say probably after my first trip to the Dome.
What was that like to go see that? Because
it was a great place to have watch a game.
After I guess, had you ever been to an indoor stadium before you'd gone to the Dome?
No. I follow baseball, so if I'm reading about the Astros 7 days a week, I'm going to become a fan, regardless of how good they are, just because that's who I'm most familiar with, and that's who I go watch. We were always out at the ballpark, so it didn't take me long at all. Where
can people see you perform these days? Where are you at in Houston? What do you go to regularly?
Every Monday night, Rudyard's on Waugh at Welch. It's a great room upstairs. Starts at 8. I'm there every Monday. The Improv, I go to their open mic. They have a contest going on now, but once that's over, they have an open mic on Tuesday. I go by there. There's a new, I say new, it's a little over a year old now, The Secret Group on Polk at St. Emmanuel. I'm there quite often. They have 3 different rooms. They have almost every night some sort of comedy show is going on. Thursday and Sunday they have open mics there. So I'm there. So Rudyard's, the Improv, The Secret Group, sometimes Darwin's Pub, which is on Welch. There's a new place, Liberty Station on Washington, that just started doing shows on Wednesday, though not this Wednesday. So yeah, that's around town. And I just finished up a week at the Joke Joint Comedy Showcase, which is south of here. They're moving to a new location in the same shopping center, the same strip center. And
you never know who you're going to see. I mean, obviously people will not only have a chance to see you going around Houston and seeing comedy, but Matthew was just here a few years ago, and it's just amazing what's happened to him as well.
Yeah, and he worked real hard. I mean, you could see he decided he wanted to do stand-up, so he just geared everything towards that purpose and studied it, so to speak. He does real well.
Any of the guys that you still keep in contact with from the old days? You said Jimmy Pineapple was one. Any of the other ones from that whole generation back when you were either at the Comedy Store or when you first got back here to Houston to do comedy?
Yeah, I talked to a lot of the workshop guys. In fact, like I said, the Comedy Showcase is moving. So this past weekend was their last shows at the old location, which had been there 10, 15 years. So Jimmy came into town to do a show, and Danny Martinez and John Fernetti, Jim Holder, a bunch of guys from the workshop were around. I see, there are a couple of guys that don't do stand-up anymore, but I stay in touch with. As far as Los Angeles in the Comedy Store, handful of people that I stay in touch with.
It's a hell of a story, Andy. I mean, it's so cool to talk to you because I'm just such a fan of that whole generation that you got to be around in Los Angeles and the guys here in Houston and Bill Hicks and Kinison and all that group. Just an amazing group of talent. I mean, it's so cool that you got to be involved with that. And so amazing that, I mean, here you were almost 40 years from the time that you started, you become a quote-unquote overnight sensation, which has got to be something really neat.
I got a bit of a bump as far as booking goes from America's Got Talent. I had this faith that just like somebody saw the contest tape that led to America's Got Talent, somebody's going to see this tape and something, you know, a bigger bump. But I have had kind of an odd, low-key career arc. It's not typical, I don't think. So, and it's not done yet.
Hey, thanks for doing this, and please go see Andy. Go find him in Houston. Like he said, Rogers is always a cool place to go on Monday nights.
Rogers is the best, yeah.
Thanks a lot, Andy.
Thank you, Robert.
I want to kick this off because I love people who still have that determination and that dream, which is why you're going to get a yes from me.
Thank you.
I think that this is your time, and I want to help you get there, so you're going to get your second yes.
Thank you.
Andy, you've been waiting 40 years, and I'm telling you, you're like fine wine. It was worth the wait. You need 3 yeses, and I am so proud and honored to give you your third.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks again for listening, and if you're new to the show, subscribe to Houston Sports Talk on iTunes, Stitcher, or the TuneIn app. You can keep up with this show and my daily Locked On Texans podcast on Twitter and Facebook, or by going to HoustonSportsTalk.net or LockedOnTexans.com.